Hey guys, it's been a while since we've had one of these actually. I did take a little bit of break, mostly because I want to get the audio dramas done. And yes, the grand finale of the audio drama is coming very soon. I have, well, more than half of it done right now. It's a bit more complex than I was expecting, and life has gotten in the way of things. Broken foot, broken cars, it just happened. But it is coming, and so we got an author today, an author who writes in genre, is one you've probably not heard of, though you might think if you saw his name initially. But this is a guy whose book comes out really soon, April 30th, that being tomorrow. You can pre-order it. Then we have ebooks coming out on May 10th, and we have physical copies at the end of May, and you can hear that all in here in the episode. But I hope you guys enjoy and give your full attention to our guest. So, Zach, let's introduce our wonderful guest.
The oracles, the soothsayers, the wisest of our sages, have known the ethereal seas of our beloved fandom for generations, chronicling each and every crowning achievement in the annals of our venerable history. Little escapes the vast breadth of their knowledge. But every so often, the hallowed halls of the Fanatarium ring with voices unfamiliar, with minds yet foreign. And it is then that our diligent ancients and our faithful acolytes alike know a joy that graces our presence far too rarely. We welcome today a new voice, a fresh voice, the voice of John Cristobal. It is no mean feat to put pen to paper, to spin a tale for the world to read, for the fans to fawn over, but this new addition to the ranks of fandom has done just this with his debut novel, Might Valour, Legacy of the Kingdom. The story of noble servant Josiah Locke's struggle for survival as he finds himself amid political turmoil following an assassination that leaves the nation of Atoranth on the brink of collapse. Mr. Cristobal, it is an invigorating joy to receive you into the ranks of fandom. We are thrilled to be graced with your company and conversation. So, welcome to the Fanatarium.
And with that intro, welcome to the show, John, or John Christopher, I guess is your pen name. The second author that I know now with that pen name, but you're not the one from the 60s, so no one confused. He's not like 90 years old with the voice of a younger man.
Yes, let's not have any mix-ups there. It's a pleasure, Jeremiah, to be on.
Fantastic, and I'm glad you reached out, because this is something that we love to do. We love to promote genre, and we love to promote authors. And this being your first book, we'd love to get as much people to pay attention to as possible. And I have to say, pretty good on the trailer. I'm not usually one that's keen on trailers for books, just because it's a book and it is, I remember on the radio when people were like, the newest novel by John Grisham.
Right.
Will someone die? Yes, someone will die. It's like 30 seconds. Like, why are they advertising a book? Just go to the bookstore and buy a book. But now I guess there's not even any bookstores really beyond like Barnes & Noble and Amazon and.
Yeah, those are the two big juggernauts out there. And I wanted to put the book trailer together to, try to make it unique in the way I promoted and advertised. And I thought the best way to go about that was to go through the podcast stage, since that's the new up and coming thing.
Yeah.
And generate interest through that forum.
Yeah, that's true. It's really the way to go. And it's a lot cheaper than doing radio, and you'll probably get close as many listeners for the most part if you get it widespread enough. So it's a good way to go. So the book that you're talking about is called Might Valour, The Legacy of the Kingdom. And for people who looked at one of the images I shared, Cristobal is Spanish for Christopher, so just relax.
Yes.
I've lived quite a few years in Puerto Rico, so I've been to San Cristobal and all that place, so
very nice.
I got used to it. So Valor.
Yeah, I've been.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So Might and Valor, Legacy of the Kingdom, fantasy genre, not an easy genre to dive into. So, why did you pick fantasy for your first novel, and what inspired you to actually take this on?
Yeah, well, I've been delving into wanting to become an author for about a decade now. And what really piqued my interest was at first not fantasy per se, but science fiction. And, I was just looking at what all the classic authors were doing. I wanted to be original in my storytelling and, just create my own story through that genre. However, what appealed to me about fantasy didn't happen until a couple of years ago, where I started seeing, I noticed shows like Game of Thrones and stuff like that, and I was looking at that for a bit, and then I was looking at other, fantasies that were coming out. Some of the classics like Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, I think, kind of inspired me too. So I kind of switched gears with that. And I noticed also that there is such a huge market in the fantasy genre. And I was like, if I'm going to start a debut novel, I might as well do it where, there's a broad audience to it, and see if I can, reach people that way. So that's kind of what my motivation was behind that. And also I felt personally, this goes back to, I guess, personal ambitions, not only to be an author, but to really compete with the big boys in the genre.
That's awesome. And, when you think about it now, you mentioned some big names. Robert Jordan, of course, he passed away a few years ago, and Sanderson's kind of taken up that mantle as far as the big boy in the genre. Right. And George R. R. Martin writes anything but Game of Thrones these days.
Yeah.
But a lot of like the ones that people look at, that grew up with, like I grew up with like David Eddings, and he passed away a decade ago now. Brian Jakes passed away a decade ago now. We had Forgotten Realms people like Ari Salvatore and so on, but yeah, a lot of the big ones are passing away quickly, so we need the next generation to pick it up and run with it.
Definitely. I agree.
So, Might and Valor, Legacy of the Kingdom, you mentioned Robert Jordan. So when people are reading this, should they expect a Robert Jordan, or what type of expectation would you give them as far as your style? Like, who do you draw from when you think about writing?
So, good question. They shouldn't expect Robert Jordan, a carbon copy of that, or any other fantasy author. They should just expect, the author on the page, because I'm looking to build my own brand. I have my own style of storytelling. While I drew inspiration from what those guys have achieved, and their status and level of excellence in their field, I actually drew from history when I wrote this story. American Civil War was part of my inspiration. I drew from some of the Old Testament in the Bible. That's going to be a little bit familiar to those that read in those genres, and I kind of cobbled that together and meshed it together to form my own kind of story. And I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised as to the style of the story, what it's about, what it entails, and whatnot.
And from the trailer, it definitely sounds like you also pulled, you said history, so pulled stuff from stuff like the Black Death and some of the
yes,
the side of medieval Europe you didn't want to live in.
Exactly, and I did draw from that, and you're going to find also characters in there that I describe as wearing the kind of garments that they would have worn in Europe during the Black Death. So that's a pretty cool nod to it.
That's awesome. So when it comes to researching fantasy, there's a couple things that people tend to do. They either tend to read everything that's out there and try to do whatever's not in there, which is hard because there's a lot of things out there.
Right.
Or they just try to write and hope no one's done it before. Or they try to mix in history and real life stuff, and so on. So like when you did research for this one, how much of it was researching what's been done in fantasy before, like dragon lore or stuff like that, and how much of it was researching what's been done in history so you know how people are supposed to act?
Right. So with regard to that, I am like obsessed with being original in my content, and I go through a lot of short stories and fantasies. I peruse Wikipedia sites to see plot lines and kind of measure those against the story I'm trying to tell. And I'm like, if it's too similar, I'll kind of stray away from that, adjust my own story. This way I'm not accused of being a carbon copy of anybody else, most especially the notable guys like George R. R. Martin. So I would say a great deal of planning and research went into going and studying the genre itself. And I'd be remiss to say that I didn't, do my homework on it or anything like that. But it was really an exhaustive study on that front, and also drawing from history. So it was like a 50-50 thing where I took my inspiration or research from the fantasy guys, and then a little bit from the history as well.
Awesome. So, what was the beginning germ of an idea for this story? What was the thing that kicked you off to write this particular story? Not just that you wanted to write a book, but what got you to kick off this particular fantasy story?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the fact that I just have this creative inkling that I have to tell a story. I have to tell something that's original. I have to tell something that's people are going to relate to in the story. And I kind of drew from that part of my mind, and as part motivation as well to create this whole fantasy world and whatnot. And again, I mean, you look at guys like J.R.R. Tolkien and Robert Jordan, all those guys. They created such imaginative worlds because I think in part they drew from their own experiences, their own creativity, and just put it on the paper and just articulate it in such a way where it made sense to some degree and it was entertaining. And that's what I wanted to do with this book.
You also mentioned the authors like Robert Jordan and J.R.R. Tolkien. They literally created their world before they started writing their story. Especially Tolkien. He literally created languages before he started writing his story because he was a linguist and decided to insert random words in the Oxford Dictionary, and we didn't find out he added them till later. Like hippopotamus. But they're known because they literally created their world before they started writing their story. So they had a world and then they put their story in it. Did you create your world before you started your story too, or did it sort of evolve as your story came out?
It was actually a 2-year process in the making, where I think the first year was geared toward just coming up with the notes for my character, my story, what the story is about, and then transitioning all those notes, cobbling that together, and then putting it into the story in the second year to write the first 3 drafts.
Awesome. So, just because we do have people here who have wanted to write novels, and some have written their first novels we've had on before, how many drafts have you done of this already?
3 drafts.
Well, that's better than Tolkien, because in Tolkien, for people who don't know, Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, which is technically 6 books. The editor combined it into 3. He wrote 6 books, but the way he wrote it is he started at the beginning, and if he ever got stuck, he'd scrap it and start over. And so when you think about it, he literally wrote 6 books without stopping. I don't know how many drafts he did. That just seems nuts. But
yeah, that
sounds painful. Sounds like a process that no one should ever have to go through.
Most definitely.
Can you imagine, though? 6 books and I'm stuck with 30 pages left. Oh, done. Throw it away. Start again.
That's dedication for you.
Probably why it took so many years. But back then, of course, we weren't freaking out about the years like we are with George R. R. Martin, who is, right faster.
Yeah.
So 3 drafts, and you've gone through this one, and now you're pretty excited to get people to start being able to access it. So why don't you tell people a little bit about your story and about your main character, the one that you spent the first year kind of developing?
Yeah, sure. So the story, the backdrop of the story rather revolves around a plague that has gone on for about a year. And there's this guy, Josiah Locke. He's the main protagonist of the story. He's under an authority called a steward, which is not a king, but it's similar to such. And they're going through one of the worst times in the world's history. Thousands and thousands of people have died, and the story takes place just after the plague has kind of died down and petered off. And they're dealing with the ramifications of that. And on top of that, you also have a war that's going on around them, not directly at them just yet, but it's creeping up on their doors. So they're getting ready for that. And there's just a lot more intrigue associated with just the common themes and backdrops. You have a lot of characters. You have a lot of stories wrapped up and rolled into one. To make a cohesive storyline, but a lot of intrigue associated with it as well. There are some whatchamacallit, I guess, supernatural aspects to it. There's some subplots where some pretty bad guys are wanting to come into the land where Josiah is and just mess stuff up even further for them, for that kingdom. But there's just a lot of grander intrigue as the reader reads on. It's not just about the minutia. It's about something bigger than a plague, something bigger than a war. And I think people are going to find that fascinating as they unwrap the layers of it like a present, or peel it back like an onion. They're going to see just many aspects of that, and it's definitely a fascinating read. And it was really fun to do to really incorporate all that stuff in there.
So is this story a self-contained story on its own with the possibility maybe of adding more stuff in the future, or is it intended to be the start of a series?
This is actually written as a 3-part series. So what's going to happen is, I'm going to release this book potentially this year, and then, going forward, maybe 1 or 2 years down the road, you'll have the sequel and so on and so forth. So there's definitely enough story per se that can be used to create additional books.
But the first story is more like, say, this is an example when it comes to movies, like, say, the original Star Wars. Yes, it started a series, but it was also mostly self-contained, so it could, if nothing else happened, it's not like you're left with, did they die? Who knows?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the interesting part about that, Jeremiah, is that this story can be considered self-contained in the sense that it can definitively end, and it would, I guess it would leave readers satisfied for the most part. But then again, maybe not, because I leave it open as well to say, okay, what's going to happen next? Be sure to tune in for the sequel for that.
So it's its own self-contained arc. It's not like, say, back to movies again, because I was talking about them not that long ago, like Hunger Games book 4 or book 3 part 1 and 2, where it's like you're halfway done and it's literally a cut in half. So it's a self-contained story, which is good.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. And it looks like, so you have on your page, you originally was going to release this in March, but you needed a little more time, which is understandable. So it looks like people can pre-order this book starting April 30th. Ebooks
Yes.
on May 10th, and print copies available on May 30th. Where can people pre-order?
So, I mean, you can pre-order pretty much on iBooks and barnesandnoble.com. It will also be available on Amazon as well.
And then ebooks, that's us pre-ordering the ebook that will appear for Nook and Kindle and so on, or pre-ordering print
Yes.
as well? Okay.
Yes.
And is print going to be available same places?
Yeah, print, I'm going to make sure it's going to be pretty widely spread. Amazon is going to be the primary channel, Barnes & Noble, and, whoever else wants one, they can order direct on either, I guess, the Smashwords website or some other websites I'll put on, or, my Facebook author page as well.
So one thing I find fascinating is covers of books. And, everyone has their own unique art style. Some people go very minimalist. Some people go very, detailed and grand. What can you tell us about the art cover of your book? Did you do it? Did you find an artist to do it? Who did your cover? What can you tell us about it?
Oh, my goodness, what a story this is! Because one thing that strikes me, and I think it strikes a lot of people, is if the cover looks awesome, I think it'll sell better than it should. If it doesn't, nobody's going to want to bother with it. And, unfortunately, people do judge a book by its cover. So,
I do all the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, I kind of farmed it out to some independent guys that do covers. I wasn't happy with the first cover. This was not the first cover that came out. So I went to, and I'm going to plug these guys here because they did such a good job. EBook launch. A guy by the name of Dane Lowe illustrated the cover. And, I told him the specifications of what I want. I gave him kind of some sample covers, some ideas as to where to go with it. I wanted something that's going to be simple, but at the same time, it's going to stand out and just, catch people's attention and say, make them say, hey, what's this? And, this looks kind of interesting. Let me pull this off the shelf and give this a second look here. So, yeah, the real challenge with the cover for me was the length of the title. And because it was such a big title, and I'm just like, oh man, maybe I should chop down the title, and this way we could incorporate more illustrations, more stuff into the cover itself. But I think it came out really good. Phenomenal looking actually, and I think people are going to gravitate toward it.
Fantastic. So, do you have any preference where people read the ebook or the print, or are you not picky on that one? Because I know some people definitely prefer to hold the physical copy, and you'd probably like them to have the cover more accessible. But what do you care which one they get?
Again, going back to personal preferences, I love holding a book, and flipping through the pages, the smell that it gives off and whatnot. I just love the feel of something tangible in my hands. I'm not sure how other people feel about that, but either or, just buy the book, either on your iPhone, iPad, or Kindle, or buy it in person in the bookstore.
Awesome. So, John, where could people, if they want to ask you more questions or follow more directly what you plan on doing, since I know you have a decently active website where you post stuff like this interview and excerpts and so on. Where can people follow more details about this, or if they want to ask you more questions, where do you prefer them to go?
Yeah, I'm usually very active on Facebook, so I have a Facebook fan page set up called Author John Christopher, and for any questions, comments, I'll definitely be happy to check it out and answer as best as I can on that.
Awesome. And so just to wrap it up, because we like to ask people some of these questions. 1 second, I have a child banging on the door. 1 second. Sorry about that. He had a folding chair and he was hitting the door with it.
No worries.
So we come back. So just we like to ask authors and so on. The people who influenced them. And you already mentioned Robert Jordan and some of those ones. So what is a book that you? That's not the book you just read. I mean, that you just wrote. What is a book that you're loving right now, or a series that you love right now, as far as genre goes, or an author you'd recommend?
Author I recommend. Good question, because I'm actually reading a historical novel, not a fantasy
Historical
one.
works.
Ulysses. Yep, Ulysses S. Grant, written by the man himself. Really in-depth biography of his exploits during the American Civil War. That's definitely a good book to read if you want a crash course on history or leadership skills.
Awesome. And then, growing up, what would you say are some of the most influential books, either single books or series, on you? Like as a reader, as a writer, as a fan of genre, what are some of the most influential books for you? I'm assuming one's probably Wheel of Time, but I don't want to presume.
Yeah, not necessarily Wheel of Time, because I recently discovered that one myself. I know this is going to sound cliche, but Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory had a big impression on me as a grade school kid. Helped me open up my imagination a bit more. Also, Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and obviously, last but not least, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series.
I imagine you're pretty excited to see whatever the heck Amazon is doing with their Second Age TV series for 5 seasons.
I am. I'm just like, oh man, I'm really pumped for that series. I'm just hoping that it's not, along the same lines as to what my book's saying and stuff like that. I'm like, ooh, I should, the plot line is a little too similar or something like that. But I'm pumped for it.
I'm just glad that they aren't doing what we've already seen. Not that you can't necessarily do it differently, but we've just got them. And so give us a Silmarillion. Give us those notes.
Right.
Oh, there could be so many awesome things in there that you can see a whole ton of Balrogs if people don't know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of Balrogs in the Silmarillion.
Yes.
That's awesome. And so your book is available on Amazon, Barnes. If books are there, your book is there. You can pre-order on April 30th, ebook on May 10th, and print on May 30th from Smashwords, and review wherever you get the book. I'm assuming Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and Smashwords is where you probably prefer reviews, yeah?
Absolutely, definitely.
And as many reviews as possible, because those are really how people find books. The more reviews, the more people can find them. Even if the book is great, if no one else says it, they're going to find it. So,
yes, please review.
And recommend it to your library, because then libraries can pick it up. they get books when you recommend it. Both
Yes, without a doubt as well.
So, and of course, you can check out your page, author John Christopher page on Facebook. Do you have Twitter? I don't remember if I asked about that.
I do have Twitter. It's actually not set up for the author page. I have another Twitter website for my business, which is totally unaffiliated with the author. But I'll definitely set one up and let people know through Facebook.
Because Twitter, it's a nice way to share it, and even stuff like Instagram, because you share covers and stuff like that. But definitely on Facebook, you're there and you post stuff, and I look forward to seeing what people think of your book. But beyond that, awesome, fantastic.
Excellent.
And I'll have to tell my wife you are not that John Christopher again. You did not write books in the 60s about tripods and caps on people's heads.
No, I
So if you have not read them, I fully recommend the Tripod Trilogy. White Mountains is the first one, City of Gold and Lead second, and The Pool of Fire. Ignore the prequel. He wrote in the 80s. He was a very different person by then, and don't read it. But the trilogy is good. They're like the size of Narnia books. They're made for young adults. But they're really good.
Yeah,
they
definitely
aren't really the same genre that you're writing. They're science fiction, but they're pretty influential as far as science fiction goes. So
very cool. Yeah,
and if they ever make a movie of them, that'll help people find you.
Yes, that would be beneficial.
But best of luck, and I do really love the cover, and I do understand the struggle that you had with the length of the title, because like you have to decide, do you want the full title there? Do you want one on the spine? How is it going to fit? But it works. It worked well, and you found a good team for that, and I hope you can keep them for future books.
I definitely plan on to, Jeremiah, and thank you. I appreciate the encouragement on that cover.
Fantastic, and have a fantastic day, and I will get this to you as soon